The scream tore through the howling wind like a knife through silk. And Samuel Foster knew in that instant his life was about to change forever. He had been checking the fence line on the eastern pasture when the storm rolled in, dark and vicious as any he had seen in his 26 years working cattle in South Dakota. The sky had turned the color of bruised flesh, and the wind carried ice that stung like hornets. Samuel had turned his horse toward town, toward Yankton, where he kept a small room above the saloon, when he heard it. A woman's voice, desperate and raw with terror, calling a name over and over. "Emma, Emma, where are you?" Samuel wheeled his bay gelding around, squinting through the driving sleet. The storm had come on fast, the way spring storms did in Dakota Territory in 1878, turning a mild April afternoon into a nightmare of wind and freezing rain. He could barely see 20 feet ahead, but he urged his horse toward the voice, his heart hammering against his ribs. She appeared like a ghost through the gray curtain of rain, a woman in a soaked blue dress, her dark hair plastered to her face, stumbling through the tall grass. She was looking wildly in every direction, calling that name again and again. Samuel brought his horse alongside her and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Madam, what's happened?" She whirled toward him, and even in the chaos of the storm he felt the impact of her eyes meeting his. They were green as new leaves, wide with panic and streaming with tears that mixed with the rain on her cheeks. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with a face that would have been beautiful if it were not twisted with fear. "My daughter," she gasped, grabbing at his coat with desperate fingers. "She was right beside me, and then the wind and I turned around and she was gone. She's only 4 years old. Please, you have to help me find her." Samuel's jaw tightened. A 4-year-old child in this storm would not last long. The temperature was dropping by the minute, and the rain was turning to sleet. Hypothermia could set in quickly, and there were ravines and gullies all through this country where a small child could fall and be lost forever. "How long ago?" he asked, already scanning the landscape. 5 minutes, maybe 10, I don't know." Her voice cracked. "We were walking back from the Hendersons' farm. The storm came so fast and the wind just pushed her away from me, and when I looked she was gone." "Which direction were you walking?" She pointed south with a shaking hand. "From there, heading toward town." Samuel nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. The wind was coming hard from the northwest, which meant if the child had been blown off course, she would have been pushed southeast. There was rough country that way, with scattered cottonwoods and a creek that would be rising fast with the rain. "What's your name?" he asked, taking the woman's arm to steady her. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Fiona," she said. "Fiona Zimmerman." "I'm Samuel Foster." "I'm going to find your daughter, Fiona, but I need you to get somewhere safe. Can you make it to town from here? I'm not leaving without Emma." Her voice was steel despite the fear in it. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. He could see she meant it, and he did not have time to argue. "Then you ride my horse. I'll search on foot. I can cover ground faster that way in this terrain, and I need you where you can see farther. Keep calling her name and watch for any movement." He helped her into the saddle, his hands strong and sure, and she settled there with the ease of someone who had ridden before. He handed her the reins and then pulled his rifle from the scabbard, not because he expected trouble, but because the stock made a good walking stick in rough country. "Stay within earshot," he said, looking up at her. Rain ran down his face from the brim of his hat. "We work in a grid pattern, back and forth. Don't go off on your own." She nodded, and he saw something in her face beyond the fear: determination, strength. This was a woman who did not break easily. They started searching, moving southeast in a zigzag pattern. Fiona called Emma's name until her voice went hoarse, and Samuel checked every clump of brush, every hollow in the ground. The storm raged around them, the wind so strong it nearly knocked him off his feet more than once. His clothes were soaked through, and he could feel the cold settling into his bones, but he pushed it aside. If he was this cold, that little girl was in real danger. They had been searching for maybe 20 minutes when Samuel heard it, a small sound, barely audible over the wind, a child's cry, thin and frightened. There, he pointed toward a stand of cottonwoods about 100 yards east. I heard her. Fiona kicked the horse into a gallop, and Samuel ran, his long legs eating up the ground. They reached the trees together, and there, huddled against the base of the largest cottonwood, was a small figure in a pink dress. The child was curled into a ball, shaking violently, her lips blue with cold. Emma. Fiona was off the horse before it fully stopped, dropping to her knees beside her daughter and pulling the child into her arms. "Oh God, Emma, baby, I've got you." Samuel shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around both of them, the heavy canvas oilcloth still holding some warmth. Emma's eyes were half closed and she was not responding to her mother's voice. That was bad, very bad. "We need to get her warm now," Samuel said, his voice urgent but calm. "Town is still 3 miles. My ranch is half that distance due west. It's got a good stove and dry blankets." Fiona looked up at him, rain streaming down her face, and nodded. There was no time for modesty or propriety. Her daughter's life hung in the balance. Samuel lifted Emma from Fiona's arms, and the child was so small, so light. It made something twist in his chest. He handed her up to Fiona, who had remounted, and then he swung up behind them both. It was a tight fit, but the bay was strong and Samuel knew the way home even in the storm. They rode hard, Fiona cradling Emma against her chest, Samuel's arms around them both to keep them steady. The wind tried to tear them from the saddle, but Samuel had been born to this land and he rode like he was part of the horse itself. His ranch appeared through the storm like a sanctuary, a low-slung house of rough timber with a barn beside it. He had built it himself over the past 3 years, every board and nail, and never had he been so grateful to see it. He dismounted in the yard and lifted Emma down, then helped Fiona, and they ran for the door. Inside, the silence after the storm's roar was almost shocking. Samuel kicked the door shut behind them and immediately went to the stove, stirring the coals to life and adding wood. The fire caught quickly, and soon warmth began to spread through the single large room that served as both kitchen and living area. "Get her out of those wet clothes," Samuel said, pulling blankets from a chest against the wall. "Wrap her in these. I'll heat water." Fiona did not hesitate. She stripped Emma's soaked dress off, revealing pale skin mottled with cold, and wrapped her in the blankets. Samuel filled a kettle and set it on the stove, then went to the other side of the room to give them privacy while he stripped off his own wet shirt and pulled on a dry one from a peg on the wall. "Is there a bed?" Fiona asked, her voice tight with worry. "Through there." He pointed to a door on the far side of the room. "Lay her down. I'll bring the hot water." Samuel's bedroom was small and spare, just a bed with a thick quilt and a single window. Fiona laid Emma on the bed and piled blankets over her, but the child was still shaking, her breathing shallow. Samuel brought in the hot water in a basin and several cloths. "We need to warm her slowly," he said. "Too fast can be as dangerous as staying cold. Warm cloths on her chest and stomach, and we keep talking to her, keep her conscious if we can." They worked together, Fiona on one side of the bed and Samuel on the other, applying the warm cloths, rubbing Emma's small hands and feet gently to restore circulation. Samuel kept up a steady stream of talk, his voice low and calm, telling Emma about the horses in his barn, about the puppies his dog had just had, about anything he could think of to keep her focused on something other than the cold. Slowly, painfully slowly, color began to return to Emma's face. Her eyes fluttered open, pale, blue, and confused, and she looked at her mother. "Mama," her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, baby." Fiona's voice broke and tears spilled down her cheeks. "You're safe now. You're going to be all right." Samuel stepped back, giving them space, and felt something loosen in his chest. The child would be all right. She was warming up, responding. He left the room quietly and went to the kitchen area to make coffee, suddenly aware that he was exhausted and chilled to the bone himself. He was pouring the coffee when Fiona emerged from the bedroom, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. She had taken off her wet outer dress and stood in just her underskirt and shirtwaist, both still damp, but not soaked through. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, drying in waves, and even with her face blotchy from tears and her eyes red-rimmed, she was the most beautiful woman Samuel had ever seen. "She's sleeping," Fiona said softly. "Her breathing is steady and she's warm. Good." Samuel poured a second cup of coffee and held it out. "You should drink this. You're still shaking." She took the cup and wrapped both hands around it, standing close to the stove. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, looking at him over the rim of the cup. "If you hadn't found us, if you hadn't helped, she would have died out there. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she shook her head. "No, not anyone. You put yourself at risk. You could have just pointed me toward town, made sure I was safe, and let me keep searching alone. But you didn't." Samuel shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I was raised to help where help is needed." They stood in silence for a moment, drinking the coffee, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind howled around the corners of the house, and sleet battered the windows, but inside it was warm and safe. "Tell me about your daughter," Samuel said, because the silence felt too heavy and he wanted to hear Fiona's voice again. A smile touched her lips, the first he had seen from her. "Emma is everything to me. She's curious and brave and funny. She loves horses and hates baths. She asks 1,000 questions a day." The smile faded. "Her father died 2 years ago, fever. It was just the two of us after that." "I'm sorry," Fiona nodded, looking down into her coffee. "We were living in Iowa, but after he died, I couldn't stay there. Too many memories. My cousin lives in Yankton, and she wrote saying there was work for a seamstress, so we came west 3 months ago. You're making a go of it. We're managing. It's hard, but we're managing." She looked up at him. "What about you? Do you run this ranch alone?" "I do now. I've got a hired man who comes in during roundup and branding, but mostly it's just me and the cattle and a few horses." Samuel set down his cup. "I came out here 5 years ago from Kansas. My father had a farm there, but I wanted something of my own, so I headed north and found this piece of land. It's not much, but it's mine. It seems like a good life. It is, lonely sometimes, but good." The way she looked at him when he said that made something shift in Samuel's chest, a feeling he could not quite name. He looked away, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of how intimate this felt, the two of them in his small house with the storm raging outside and her daughter sleeping in his bed. "You should rest," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You've been through an ordeal. I'll check on Emma." But Fiona caught his arm as he moved past her. Her hand was small and warm on his skin, and he stopped, looking down at her. "Thank you," she said again. "Truly, I won't forget what you did today." Samuel nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and went into the bedroom to check on the sleeping child. The storm blew itself out by evening, leaving the world washed clean and dripping. Samuel made a simple supper of beans and bacon and biscuits, and Fiona insisted on helping despite his protests. Emma woke up hungry and irritable, which Samuel took as a good sign, and Fiona fed her broth and bits of biscuit until the child's eyes grew heavy again. "I should try to get us back to town," Fiona said as darkness fell. "My cousin will be worried." Samuel looked out the window at the muddy yard and the darkening sky. "The roads will be a mess, and it's not safe to travel at night. You and Emma should stay here tonight. I'll ride into town first thing in the morning and let your cousin know you're safe." Fiona hesitated, and Samuel understood. A single woman staying overnight at a bachelor's ranch was the sort of thing that could ruin a reputation, even in a frontier town like Yankton where people tended to be more practical about such things. "Emma needs rest," he added, "and so do you. I'll sleep in the barn, you take the bed." "I can't let you sleep in the barn. This is your home." "I've slept in worse places." Samuel smiled slightly. "Please. I'll feel better knowing Emma is in a proper bed." In the end, Fiona agreed, because exhaustion was written in every line of her face and because Emma was already asleep again. Samuel banked the fire, left them with the lamp and extra blankets, and took his bedroll out to the barn. He settled in the hay loft, listening to the horses moving in their stalls below and the drip of water from the eaves. He should have been tired, should have fallen asleep immediately, but his mind would not settle. He kept seeing Fiona's face, the fear in her eyes when she begged him to help find Emma, the way she had looked at him over her coffee cup, the feel of her hand on his arm. Samuel had been alone for a long time. He had told himself he was content with it, that he did not need anything more than his ranch and his work. But lying there in the darkness, he felt the weight of his solitude in a way he had not felt in years. He woke before dawn and went to the house quietly, not wanting to disturb Fiona and Emma if they were still sleeping. But when he opened the door, he found Fiona already awake, sitting at his small table with a cup of what smelled like fresh coffee. "You're up early," he said. "I'm used to early mornings." She smiled at him, and in the soft light of the lamp she had lit, she looked younger, less burdened. "I made coffee. I hope you don't mind. I found the pot in the grounds." "I don't mind at all." Samuel poured himself a cup and sat down across from her. "How's Emma?" "Still sleeping. I think she's going to be fine, thanks to you." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and then Fiona said, "I've been thinking. I owe you a debt I can't really repay, but if you ever need anything mending or sewing, you come to me, no charge." "You don't owe me anything." "I disagree." Her green eyes met his steadily. "But even if I didn't, I'd like to see you again, if you're ever in town." Samuel felt heat rise in his face, and he looked down at his coffee. "I come into Yankton most Saturdays for supplies. I have a room behind my cousin's boarding house on 3rd Street, Sadie Marsh's place. You'd be welcome to stop by." "I might do that." The smile she gave him then was worth riding through 100 storms. Samuel rode into Yankton that morning to let Fiona's cousin know they were safe, then returned to the ranch to take them home himself. He hitched up his wagon, lined it with blankets, and drove Fiona and Emma back to town with the spring mud sucking at the wheels and the sun breaking through the clouds in shafts of golden light. Emma chattered the whole way, her near-death experience apparently forgotten in the resilience of childhood. She told Samuel about her doll, about the cat that lived behind the boarding house, about how her mama made the prettiest dresses in all of Dakota Territory. Fiona tried to shush her, but Samuel did not mind. He liked the sound of the child's voice, the way it filled the silence he had grown so used to. When they reached the boarding house, a tall woman with iron-gray hair came rushing out, tears streaming down her face. This was Sadie Marsh, Fiona's cousin, and she embraced Fiona and Emma both, crying and scolding and thanking Samuel all at once. "I was out of my mind with worry," Sadie said, wiping her eyes with her apron. "When you didn't come back before the storm and then all night long, I thought the worst." "Mr. Foster saved us," Fiona said quietly, her hand on Emma's shoulder. "Emma got lost in the storm and he found her." Sadie looked at Samuel with new eyes, and then she insisted he come in for breakfast, refusing to take no for an answer. Samuel found himself sitting at a long table in the boarding house dining room, surrounded by the other residents who had gathered to hear the story, eating eggs and fried potatoes while Fiona and Sadie fussed over Emma. He slipped away as soon as he could without being rude, feeling out of place in the warmth and chaos of the boarding house. But as he climbed back onto his wagon, Fiona came out onto the porch. "Saturday," she called. He smiled. "Saturday." Samuel did not think he had ever looked forward to a Saturday as much as he did that week. He went about his work with a lightness he had not felt in years, whistling as he mended fence and checked on the new calves. His hired man, an older fellow named Pete, noticed and made a few knowing comments that Samuel ignored with good humor. When Saturday finally came, Samuel bathed in the creek even though the water was still cold from snowmelt, and he put on his best shirt and trousers. He rode into Yankton with his heart beating faster than it should, wondering if Fiona had just been being polite, if she would even remember inviting him. But when he knocked on the door of the small house behind the boarding house, Fiona opened it immediately, as if she had been watching for him. She wore a green dress that matched her eyes, and her dark hair was pinned up with a few curls escaping around her face. "You came," she said, and there was genuine pleasure in her voice. "I said I would." Emma appeared behind her mother, and her face lit up when she saw Samuel. "Mr. Foster, did you bring your horse?" "Can I see it?" "Emma Manners," Fiona chided gently, but Samuel laughed. "I did bring my horse, and yes, you can see him, if your mother says it's all right." They spent the afternoon together, the three of them, walking through Yankton's muddy streets. Samuel showed Emma his horse, lifting her up to pet the gelding's soft nose. They stopped at the general store where Samuel needed to pick up supplies, and Emma was fascinated by everything, asking questions that made the shopkeeper smile. Fiona bought ribbon and thread, and Samuel noticed the way her hands moved over the fabric, sure and skilled. They had supper at a small restaurant on Main Street, nothing fancy, but the food was good and hot. Emma fell asleep against her mother's shoulder before they finished, worn out from the excitement of the day. "I should get her home," Fiona said softly, stroking Emma's hair. Samuel carried the sleeping child back to the boarding house, her small weight warm against his chest, and Fiona walked beside him. The evening was cool and clear, and above them the stars were coming out one by one. At the door, Fiona took Emma from him carefully, trying not to wake her. "Thank you for today," she said. "It was wonderful." "It was." Samuel hesitated, then said, "Could I see you again? Not just by chance, I mean. Could I call on you properly?" Fiona's smile was soft in the twilight. "I'd like that very much." So began a courtship that felt both slow and rushing all at once. Samuel came to Yankton every Saturday, and sometimes during the week if his work allowed it. He and Fiona would walk together, or sit on the porch of the boarding house, or have supper at the restaurant. Emma was always with them, and Samuel found he did not mind. The child was growing on him, with her endless questions and her easy laughter. But there were also moments when he and Fiona were alone, stolen minutes that felt precious. Times when Emma was napping and they could sit together in Fiona's small parlor, talking about everything and nothing. Times when he would walk her home in the evening and they would linger at her door, standing close enough that he could smell the lavender she tucked into her hair. Samuel learned about her life before she came to Yankton, about her marriage to a man she had cared for but not loved with passion, about the hardship of losing him and being left alone with a child to raise. Fiona learned about Samuel's childhood in Kansas, about his father's stern hand and his mother's gentle heart, about why he had left to find his own way. "I always felt like I didn't quite fit there," Samuel told her one evening as they sat on the porch. Emma was inside with Sadie, and they had this rare moment of privacy. "My father wanted me to take over the farm, but I wanted something different, something mine. And you found it." "I did, but I didn't realize until recently that something was missing." Fiona looked at him, her green eyes searching his face. "What was missing?" Samuel reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses from sewing, the strength in her fingers. "Someone to share it with. I thought I was content alone, but I was wrong, Samuel." His name on her lips was soft, almost wondering. "I'm not good with words," he said, holding her gaze. "But I need you to know that what we've been doing, it means something to me. You mean something to me, you and Emma both. You mean something to us too." She squeezed his hand. "Emma asks about you every day, and I think about you every night before I sleep." He wanted to kiss her then, wanted it so badly his chest ached with it, but he could hear voices inside the house, and he knew Sadie, or one of the other boarding house residents, might come out at any moment. So instead he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, his eyes never leaving hers. The seasons turned from spring into summer, and Samuel's courtship of Fiona deepened. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, clumsy bouquets of black-eyed Susans and prairie roses that made her laugh with delight. He carved a small horse for Emma out of cottonwood, spending hours on the detail, and the child carried it everywhere. He helped Fiona with the heavy work around her house, fixing a loose board on the porch, replacing a broken window pane. And slowly, carefully, he showed her his heart. It was late July when he finally kissed her. They had taken Emma to a church social, and the child had fallen asleep on a blanket under a tree, exhausted from playing with the other children. Samuel and Fiona sat beside her, watching the sun go down in a blaze of orange and red across the prairie sky. "It's beautiful," Fiona said softly. "Yes," Samuel agreed, but he was looking at her, not the sunset. She turned and caught him looking, and something changed in her expression. The careful politeness they had both been maintaining fell away, and what was left was raw and honest. "Samuel," she whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, and then deeper as she leaned into him. Samuel cupped her face in his hands, feeling the softness of her skin, the way she trembled slightly. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Fiona's eyes were bright with tears. "I didn't think I'd feel this way again," she said. "After my husband died, I thought that part of my life was over." "I never felt this way before," Samuel admitted. "Not with anyone. What are we going to do?" Samuel glanced at Emma, sleeping peacefully on the blanket, and then back at Fiona. "I want to marry you. I want you and Emma to come live at the ranch. I want to build a life with you." "Samuel, it's only been a few months." "I know. And if you need more time, I'll wait. But I know what I feel, Fiona. I know I love you. I've known it since that first day in the storm." She let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "I love you too. God help me, I do. Then marry me. Let me take care of you, both of you." Fiona was quiet for a long moment, and Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs. Then she smiled, that beautiful smile that lit up her whole face, and said, "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." They were married in August in the small church in Yankton, with Sadie and Pete standing up for them and half the town in attendance. Emma was the flower girl, scattering rose petals with serious concentration. Fiona wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue silk that made her eyes look like jewels. Samuel wore his best suit and felt like the luckiest man alive when the preacher said he could kiss his bride. The wedding breakfast was held at the boarding house, with food enough to feed an army and fiddle music that had people dancing in the street. But Samuel was impatient for it to be over, impatient to start his new life. When the sun began to set, he loaded Fiona and Emma and all their belongings into the wagon and drove them home to the ranch. Emma fell asleep in the wagon bed, curled up among the quilts and dresses. Fiona sat close to Samuel on the bench seat, her hand in his, her head resting on his shoulder. "Are you nervous?" Samuel asked quietly. "A little," she admitted. "It's a big change, leaving town, starting over. You can change your mind. We can go back right now if you want." She lifted her head and looked at him, and in the fading light her face was serious. "I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. With you." When they reached the ranch, Samuel carried Emma inside first, laying her gently in the small bedroom he had added onto the house over the past month. It was not much, just 4 walls and a window and a narrow bed, but he had built it with his own hands for his new daughter, because that was what Emma would be now. His daughter. Then he went back for Fiona, and this time he carried her over the threshold the way tradition demanded, making her laugh as she clung to his neck. He set her down inside and lit the lamp, and they stood there looking at each other, suddenly shy. "I know this isn't what you're used to," Samuel said, gesturing around at the small house with its rough-hewn furniture and plain walls. "But I'll make it better. I'll add on, make it a proper house for you and Emma." Fiona walked to him and put her hands on his chest, looking up into his face. "It's already perfect because you're here. We're here, together." He kissed her then, and this time there was no need to hold back. She was his wife and he was her husband, and they had all the time in the world. The kiss deepened, grew heated, and Samuel lifted her into his arms and carried her to his bedroom, their bedroom now, closing the door softly behind them. The next morning, Samuel woke to the sound of Emma's voice chattering away and the smell of coffee. He got up and dressed, and went out to find Fiona at the stove making breakfast while Emma sat at the table telling her about a dream she had had involving horses and butterflies, and a castle made of cake. Fiona looked up when Samuel entered, and her smile was radiant. "Good morning, husband." "Good morning, wife." He kissed her cheek and then Emma's head. "Good morning, Emma." "Good morning, Papa," Emma said, as naturally as if she had been calling him that all her life. Samuel froze, his throat suddenly tight. He looked at Fiona, who had tears in her eyes, and then back at Emma. "Is that all right?" the child asked, suddenly uncertain. "Mama said I could call you Papa if I wanted to." Samuel knelt down beside her chair so they were at eye level. "It's more than all right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'd be honored to be your papa." Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Samuel held her close. This child who had come into his life in a storm and stolen his heart without even trying. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm that felt right in a way Samuel had never experienced before. He would rise before dawn and go out to check on the cattle and horses, but now when he came back to the house, there were voices and laughter waiting for him. Fiona transformed the house with small touches, curtains at the windows and rag rugs on the floor and wildflowers in jars on the table. She cooked meals that were better than anything Samuel had ever made for himself, and she kept the house cleaner than it had ever been. But more than that, she filled it with warmth. She sang while she worked, and she laughed at Samuel's terrible jokes, and she sat with him in the evenings after Emma was asleep and talked about their days. They made plans for the future, about how many cattle they might run, about whether to plant a bigger garden, about everything and nothing. And at night in their bed, Samuel learned what it meant to truly love someone. Not just the physical joining, though that was sweet and powerful and left him breathless, but the intimacy of lying in the darkness and sharing secrets, of holding her while she slept, of waking up and seeing her face first thing in the morning. Emma thrived on the ranch. She followed Samuel everywhere, asking endless questions about the cattle and the horses, and why the sky was blue, and where the wind came from. He made her a small rope and taught her how to practice roping on a post, and she worked at it with fierce determination. She helped Fiona in the garden, getting more dirt on herself than on the plants, and she made friends with the barn cats and named every single one. One evening in September, Samuel came in from the evening chores to find Fiona sitting at the table with her sewing pushed aside, her hands folded in her lap. Emma was already asleep and the house was quiet. "What's wrong?" Samuel asked immediately, seeing the serious expression on her face. "Nothing's wrong." She looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes he could not read. "Samuel, sit down. I need to tell you something." His heart lurched. Had she changed her mind? Did she regret marrying him? He sat down across from her, his hands clenched on the table. "I'm pregnant," Fiona said simply. Samuel stared at her. "You're certain?" "Yes. The signs are all there. I'd say I'm about 2 months along, so the baby will come in late March or early April. A baby. His baby. Their baby." Samuel felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. And then joy, pure and overwhelming, rushed through him. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over, and he pulled Fiona up into his arms, holding her tight. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Happy." He pulled back to look at her face, and he was grinning so wide his cheeks hurt. "Fiona, I'm more than happy. I'm thrilled. Terrified but thrilled," she laughed, and he could hear relief in it. "I was worried you might not want another child. Emma's not yours by blood." "Emma is mine in every way that matters," Samuel said firmly. "And this baby will be ours. God, Fiona, a baby." He kissed her then, pouring all his happiness and love into it, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. Later, lying in bed with Fiona curled against his side, Samuel thought about how much his life had changed in less than a year. From a lonely man on an isolated ranch to a husband and father with another child on the way. It was more than he had ever dreamed of having. The winter of 1878 into 79 was hard, with bitter cold and deep snow, but Samuel barely noticed. He was too busy preparing for the baby, building a proper cradle from oak wood, making sure the house was sealed tight against drafts, laying in extra supplies. Fiona grew round with the baby, and Samuel thought she had never been more beautiful. Emma was excited about becoming a big sister, though she seemed to think the baby would be able to play with her immediately, and was disappointed to learn it would take months before the baby could do much of anything. Still, she helped Fiona sew tiny gowns and blankets, her stitches crooked but earnest. The baby came on a warm day in early April, arriving faster than anyone expected. Samuel rode into town for the midwife, but by the time they returned, Sadie was already there and Fiona was in hard labor. Samuel paced the kitchen while Emma sat wide-eyed on a chair, listening to her mother's cries from the bedroom. "Is Mama going to be all right?" Emma asked, her voice small. Samuel picked her up and held her, even though she was getting big for it. "Your Mama is going to be fine. She's strong. She's bringing your brother or sister into the world." "I hope it's a brother," Emma said. "Girls are boring." Despite his worry, Samuel smiled, and then, just as the sun was setting, there was a different cry, high and strong, and a baby's wail. Samuel set Emma down and went to the bedroom door, his heart in his throat. The midwife opened it a moment later, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Foster, and your wife is just fine." Samuel went in to find Fiona propped up against the pillows, exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had sewn. Samuel sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son. The baby was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. "He's perfect," Samuel said, his voice choked with emotion. "You want to hold him?" Fiona asked. Samuel took the baby carefully, afraid he might break him, but the baby settled against his chest as if he knew he was safe. Samuel looked down at his son and felt love so fierce it was almost painful. "What should we name him?" Fiona asked. They had discussed names but had not decided on anything. Now, looking at his son, Samuel said, "What about Daniel? It was my grandfather's name." "Daniel Foster," Fiona smiled. "I like it." Emma was allowed in then, and she climbed up on the bed to see her brother. She studied him seriously for a long moment and then pronounced, "He's wrinkly." "You were wrinkly when you were born too," Fiona said, laughing. "Can I hold him?" Samuel helped Emma hold Daniel, keeping his hands ready in case she lost her grip, but Emma was surprisingly gentle. She looked down at her baby brother with wonder in her eyes. "Hello, Daniel," she said softly. "I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you everything." That night, after the midwife and Sadie had left, after Emma was asleep in her room and Daniel was sleeping in his cradle beside the bed, Samuel lay awake with Fiona in his arms. "Thank you," he said into the darkness. "For what? For this? For all of it. For marrying me, for giving me a son, for making me happier than I ever thought I could be." Fiona turned in his arms so she could see his face in the moonlight coming through the window. "You saved my life, Samuel. You saved Emma's life. And then you gave us a home and a family. If anyone should be grateful, it's me." "I love you," Samuel said, because it was the simplest truth he knew. "I love you too. Always." The years that followed were good ones, filled with hard work and simple joys. The ranch prospered as Samuel's reputation for raising good cattle spread. He hired more help, men he trusted, and slowly expanded his herd. Fiona took in some sewing work, making dresses and shirts for the townspeople, and her skill became well known. The money she earned she saved carefully, and she was proud of the contribution she made to the family. Emma grew like a weed, tall and strong and fearless. She learned to ride almost before she could walk properly, and she could rope a calf by the time she was 8. She was her father's shadow, following Samuel everywhere, learning the ranch work with an enthusiasm that made him proud. Daniel was different, quieter and more thoughtful. He loved animals with a passion that went beyond the practical, and he would sit for hours watching a bird build a nest or a spider spin a web. Samuel wondered if the boy might become a veterinarian someday, or perhaps a naturalist. Whatever Daniel chose to do, Samuel would support him. 2 years after Daniel was born, Fiona had another baby, a daughter they named Rose. And 3 years after that, another son they named Thomas. The house was full to bursting with children and noise and love, and Samuel added rooms onto it again and again, until it was barely recognizable as the small bachelor's cabin it had once been. There were hard times too. A drought one summer that killed off half the herd. A winter so cold that they lost livestock, despite Samuel's best efforts. A bout of scarlet fever that swept through Yankton and left them terrified for the children, though thankfully all of them recovered. The death of Pete, who had become like a father to Samuel, found one morning in his bunk having died peacefully in his sleep. But through it all, Samuel and Fiona held fast to each other. They were partners in every sense of the word, facing each challenge together, celebrating each victory together. The love that had started in a storm never wavered, never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. One evening in the summer of 1889, Samuel sat on the porch of his house watching the sun go down. Fiona sat beside him in the rocking chair he had made for her, her hand in his. Emma, now 15, was in the corral working with a young horse. Daniel, 12, was reading a book on the steps. Rose, 8, was playing with a rag doll, and Thomas, 5, was chasing the barn cats around the yard. "You remember the day we met?" Fiona asked softly. Samuel smiled. "Every detail. The storm, the way you grabbed my coat, the fear in your eyes. And then later, the way you looked at me over that coffee cup." "I knew that day," Fiona said. "When you brought Emma and me here and took care of us, I knew you were someone special. I knew too. I fought it for a while, told myself I was just being helpful, but I knew." They sat in companionable silence, watching their children, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Samuel thought about how close he had come to missing all of this. If he had not been checking that fence line that day, if he had turned away from Fiona's cries for help, if he had been a different kind of man, but he had been there and he had helped, and everything that mattered in his life had flowed from that one decision. "What are you thinking?" Fiona asked. "That I'm grateful. That if I could go back and live my life over, I wouldn't change a single thing." She squeezed his hand. "Not even the drought, or the scarlet fever, not even that, because all of it, the good and the bad, brought us here, to this moment, and this moment is perfect." Emma called out from the corral, her voice bright with triumph. "Papa, come look." "He's finally taking the saddle." Samuel stood up, smiling. "Duty calls." But before he went down the steps, he leaned over and kissed Fiona, sweet and gentle. "I love you, Mrs. Foster. I love you too, Mr. Foster. Now go help your daughter before that horse bucks her off." Samuel walked across the yard to the corral, Daniel falling into step beside him, and Thomas abandoning the cats to follow. Rose came running too, not wanting to be left out. The whole family gathered at the fence to watch Emma work with the horse, offering encouragement and advice in equal measure. And Fiona sat on the porch, one hand resting on her belly where, though she had not told Samuel yet, another baby was growing. She watched her husband and her children and felt her heart swell with love and gratitude for the life they had built together. The sun finally slipped below the horizon and the first stars came out. The prairie stretched away in all directions, vast and beautiful and harsh and giving all at once. This was home. This was family. This was everything that mattered. That night, after the children were all in bed, Fiona told Samuel about the baby. He pulled her close and held her tight, and she felt his tears on her hair. "Another one," he said, wonder in his voice. "How did I get so lucky?" "We got lucky," Fiona corrected. "Both of us." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, and afterward, Samuel lay with his hand on Fiona's belly, already imagining the child growing there. "Boy or girl?" he asked. "I don't know. What do you hope for? I don't care. As long as you and the baby are healthy, I don't care. If it's a girl, I want to name her Grace." "Grace." Samuel tested the name. "I like it. And if it's a boy, you choose." Samuel thought for a moment. "What about Matthew, after your father?" Fiona's eyes filled with tears. Her father had died when she was young, and she did not talk about him often, but Samuel knew she had loved him dearly. "Yes," she said. "Matthew. He would have been so happy to see us like this, to see how well we've done. He would have been proud of you. I'm proud of you." The baby was born in February of 1890. In the middle of a blizzard that made the storm, Samuel and Fiona had met in look mild by comparison. The midwife could not make it out from town, and Sadie was too old now to travel in such weather, so Samuel delivered the baby himself with Emma's help. Emma, who was now 16 and as capable as any woman, boiled water and fetched clean cloths and held her mother's hand through the worst of the pain. And when the baby finally came, a little girl with Fiona's green eyes, Samuel cut the cord with hands that shook and wrapped his daughter in a blanket and handed her to his wife. "Grace," Fiona said, smiling down at the baby. "Grace Foster." Emma looked at her baby sister with awe. "She's beautiful, Mama." And she was. They all were. All of Samuel's children, whether born to him or not, were beautiful and precious and more than he had ever thought to have. As the years rolled on, the Foster Ranch became one of the most successful in South Dakota. Samuel's children grew up strong and capable, each finding their own path. Emma married a neighboring rancher's son when she was 20, a good man who loved her and treated her well. They built a home on land adjoining Samuel's ranch, and Emma's children grew up playing with their aunts and uncles who were not much older than they were. Daniel, true to his nature, went east to study veterinary medicine and came back to Yankton to open a practice. He married a schoolteacher from town, a gentle woman named Mary who shared his love of animals and books. Rose became a teacher herself, following in Mary's footsteps, and she married a lawyer from Sioux Falls. Thomas took over running the ranch alongside Samuel, showing a head for business and a way with cattle that matched his father's. And Grace, the baby born in the blizzard, grew up to be a fiery young woman who wanted to vote and own property and have all the rights men had. She went to college in Omaha and became a journalist, writing articles about women's suffrage that made her father both proud and nervous. Through it all, Samuel and Fiona remained the center of the family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love for each other never wavered, never faded. They grew old together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes, but they still held hands on the porch in the evenings. They still danced in the kitchen when they thought no one was watching. They still kissed goodnight every single night without fail. In the spring of 1910, when Samuel was 58 and Fiona was 54, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that brought people from all over the county. Their children and grandchildren filled the house and spilled out into the yard, and there was music and dancing and food enough to feed half of Dakota. Emma made a toast, standing on a chair so everyone could see her. "To my parents," she said, raising her glass, "who taught me what love looks like, who showed me that a good marriage is built on respect and partnership and choosing each other every single day. Papa, you saved Mama and me in that storm 32 years ago, but what you really did was save all of us. Because without you, without the two of you together, none of us would be here. So here's to you. May you have 30 more years together." "Hear, hear," everyone shouted, and Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Samuel and Fiona walked out to the barn together, as they often did. They stood in the doorway looking out at the land that stretched away into darkness, at the stars blazing overhead. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Fiona asked. "When I stayed here after the storm, I said a lot of things. You said you had found a good piece of land, but it was lonely sometimes." Samuel nodded. "I remember." "Is it still lonely?" He pulled her close, tucking her against his side. "Not for one single second." "You filled every empty place I had, Fiona. You and the children. You gave me a life I never even knew to dream of. You gave me the same. After my first husband died, I thought that was it for me. I thought I'd raise Emma alone and that would be enough. But then you came riding out of that storm like something out of a fairy tale and you changed everything." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "I love you, more now than even on the day we married. I love you too, always and forever." They stood there together in the darkness, two people who had found each other by chance and built a life by choice. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the scent of rain and earth and growing things. Somewhere an owl called and another answered. The world turned, the stars wheeled overhead, and Samuel Foster knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The years continued to pass, as they always do. Samuel's hair turned white, and his hands became gnarled with arthritis, but he still rose every morning before dawn and went out to check on the cattle. Fiona's eyes grew weak, and she needed spectacles to do her sewing, but her stitches were still sure and true. They slowed down, as all people do, but they did not stop. They did not give up. They celebrated the birth of each new grandchild with joy, and they mourned together when Emma's husband died in a ranching accident, and they worried together when Thomas's wife had a difficult pregnancy, and they laughed together at the antics of their growing family. On a warm summer evening in 1923, Samuel and Fiona sat on the porch as they had done 1,000 times before. Samuel was 71 now, and his body ached in ways it never had when he was young, but his mind was clear and his heart was full. "I've been thinking," he said. "Always dangerous," Fiona teased. She was 67, her dark hair now snow-white, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. "I've been thinking about that day we met, about Emma getting lost in the storm." "Why are you thinking about that?" Samuel reached over and took her hand. "Because I want you to know that if I had to live my life over, if I could change anything, I wouldn't. That storm brought you to me. It gave me everything." Fiona's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "We've had a good life, haven't we? The best. The very best." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun go down, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas's oldest boy was teaching one of the younger ones how to rope a post, just as Samuel had once taught Emma. The cycle continued, generation to generation, love passed down like a precious inheritance. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found us that day?" Fiona asked. Samuel considered the question. "Sometimes. I think I would have lived and died a lonely old bachelor, and no one would have cared much either way. But you would have been all right, you're strong. You would have found a way. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to." She squeezed his hand. "I'm glad I had you, and I'm glad I had you." As the stars came out one by one, Samuel thought about all the storms he had weathered in his life. The literal storms of wind and rain and snow, and the metaphorical ones of loss and hardship and grief. But through every storm, Fiona had been beside him, her hand in his, her strength bolstering his own. That was what marriage was, he thought. Not just the good times, though those were precious. It was the hard times too, the storms, and having someone to stand with you through them. Someone who would not run when things got difficult. Someone who chose you every day, over and over again. He had found that in Fiona, and she had found it in him, and together they had built something that would outlast them both. Their children, their grandchildren, the ranch itself, all of it was a testament to the love that had started with a woman's desperate plea for help and a man's decision to answer it. Samuel stood up, his joints protesting, and held out his hand to Fiona. "Dance with me. There's no music." "We don't need music." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, and they swayed together on the porch, two old people dancing to a song only they could hear. Their grandchildren watched from the yard and smiled, and Thomas came out to the porch and stood beside his wife, pulling her close. "That's what I want," Thomas said to his wife. "When we're old, I want us to still be dancing." "Then we will be," she said. When Samuel and Fiona finally stopped dancing, they were both breathless and laughing. They sat back down in their chairs, and Samuel kept hold of Fiona's hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles in a gesture worn smooth by decades of repetition. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For saying yes, for marrying me, for every day since." Fiona leaned over and kissed his cheek. "Thank you for searching until you found us, for not giving up even when the storm was raging." "I will always search for you," Samuel said, "in this life and whatever comes after. You're the other half of my soul." They sat on the porch until the stars were bright overhead and the grandchildren had been called into bed. They sat until the lamps were lit in the windows of the house, and the sounds of the evening settled into the peaceful quiet of night. And when they finally went inside, they went together, hand in hand as they always had and always would. Samuel Foster lived to be 79 years old, and when he died on a cold morning in January of 1931, he died peacefully in his sleep with Fiona beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, and she kissed his forehead and whispered that she loved him, that she would see him again someday. Fiona lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. She spent those years telling stories about Samuel, about the ranch, about the life they had built together. She made sure no one forgot the man who had ridden out of a storm and changed all their lives. And when Fiona died in the spring of 1936, on a warm day when the prairie was covered in wildflowers, she was buried beside Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch. Emma, now 63 and a grandmother herself, stood at the grave and wept for her mother and the stepfather who had loved her as his own. But it was not an ending, not really, because Samuel and Fiona lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They lived on in the ranch that still bore the Foster name. They lived on in the stories passed down through the generations, about a cowboy who searched until he found a lost child, about a woman who had the courage to love again, about two people who chose each other and built a life together one day at a time. And on summer evenings, when the wind whispers through the prairie grass and the stars come out one by one, if you stand on the porch of the old Foster ranch and listen carefully, some say you can still hear them. The sound of an old couple laughing together, the soft melody of a dance shared in the twilight, the quiet murmur of two voices speaking words of love that time could never erase. Because some loves are strong enough to weather any storm. Some loves are deep enough to last forever. And some loves, like the love between Samuel Foster and Fiona Zimmerman Foster, are the kind that change not just two lives but generations to come, rippling out like circles on water, touching everyone they reach. That is the legacy they left behind. Not just land or cattle or material wealth, though there was some of that too, but love. Pure, steadfast, unshakable love. The kind of love that says I will search until I find you. The kind of love that says I choose you today and every day. The kind of love that builds homes and families and futures. The kind of love that starts with a child lost in a storm and a cowboy who refused to give up until he found her, and ends with a family tree that branches wide and strong, providing shelter for all who come after. That is their story. That is their gift to the world, and it will endure long after the prairie reclaims the ranch, long after the last stone marker crumbles to dust. Because love like that never truly dies. It lives on, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, generation to generation, an eternal flame in the darkness, a beacon guiding lost souls home. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Samuel and Fiona dance together still, reunited at last, their love undiminished by time or death. They are together as they always were meant to be, as they always will be, forever and always, two halves of one whole, complete.